I'm Armstrong Williams. When I was asked to conduct this interview with Andrew Breitbart, someone that we've heard so much about, particularly over the last couple of years, whether it's Van Jones, whether it's Acorn, and the incredible role that he played into the revelation about the individuals and organizations. We all have our mixed emotions. And so when I finally received the book, Righteous Indignation, Excuse Me While I Save the World, I really didn't know what to expect. But I must tell you, as someone who reads 2 books a week, it is a book that really impacted me. It really brought to realization the things that in my own life that I write about, that I've experienced and others have experienced. This is really a book that I strongly recommend, and I'm meeting Andrew Breitbart for the first time. I don't know him. This is our first encounter. But I will tell you, this is an incredible piece of work that I strongly recommend that you read, and you will understand why over the next hour. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Pleasure.
You grew up as a liberal. Your mentors were liberal. Talk about that moment in your life.
Well, you know, there's David Horowitz, who was the apostate who went from the left to the right, and he did so in an incredibly deep fashion, and he was an intellect. Well, I was the shallowest form of a liberal that you could possibly be. I grew up on the west side of Los Angeles, and my week in high school constituted going to about 3 or 4 movies a week, going out with my friends, watching television, going to a prep school, then going on to Tulane University. At no point in that entire experience in West Los Angeles where the executives of Hollywood, executives of Hollywood studios live, and actors and such, people within the industry. At no point during that period of time did I hear conservative thought. No, at no point did I have any opportunity to become anything other than liberal. So I considered myself a default liberal.
Let me interrupt you. In your book, you talk about one of those life-changing moments. You're watching the Justice Thomas, Anita Hill hearings. What happens to Andrew Breitbart?
Well, I just graduated from college, a place where it was like my bar mitzvah. I thought in my bar mitzvah that I would learn an education about Judaism, but I left feeling very empty because I just learned how to chant. And I felt I was open for a spiritual experience. I didn't get it. I felt the exact same way in college, where I was an American Studies major, and the stuff that I was reading was incomprehensible, and it was jargon. It was Noam Chomsky-like in its lack of comprehension to a person who doesn't understand that language, and it was demoralizing. And I graduated less skilled, less motivated, and I was a waiter. And
you robbed yourself.
I did. My education was a lack of an education. And so I was waiting tables right after graduating college, and I finished my lunch shift, and I'd go home.
And your friends would say to you, why are you doing this? You're so much better than this.
Yeah,
what are you doing with your life?
It was embarrassing.
Yes.
It was humiliating. It was the best thing that ever happened in my life, was the humiliation of having to work and to grind it, and the people that I was always looking up to and trying to impress were looking down on me. And I started to pay for my own shoes and started to...
But your parents cut you off.
My parents cut me off. It was brutal, and that's why I dedicated the book to my father, who cut me off, and Clarence Thomas at the same time. Both of their guidance in my life coincided.
That's a good segue back to the hearings.
Yeah. Well, I went from my wait job, and I started watching the hearings, wanting to root for the takedown of Clarence Thomas. I watched the television set, and the television set told me that this was a bad man, and the newspapers told me that he was a bad man. I remember Eleanor Smeal, I remember Patricia Schroeder walking up the steps, these ladies, and saying, this guy, we're going to take a stand against this guy for sexual harassment, serial sexual harassment. So I watched these hearings like a spectator who wanted to see somebody mauled, like lions mauling, Romans. And I watched day 1, I watched day 2, I watched the entire thing. I went from wanting him to be taken down to wondering, where's the beef? What's going on here? I don't understand what I'm watching here. I don't understand the color commentary that's on the screen. where they're saying, oh, this is outrageous. And I didn't understand the bumper stickers that were going by me on the street saying, I believe Anita. I said, I believe Anita what? What's going on here? I don't understand what's going on here. Everything that I knew, everything that I picked up at college in my American studies, cultural Marxist, oppressor, oppressed, black people are always right, white people are always wrong. I didn't understand how Ted Kennedy, the Ted Kennedy of Chappaquiddick fame, how Howard Metzenbaum, Joe Biden, a series of white privileged men could sit in judgment of this man who was the son of grandparents who were sharecroppers who raised him, and he went to Yale Law School. He did everything right, including allowing for Anita Hill to rise through the ranks of the legal profession, through jobs with him, where she never had a sexual relationship with him at all. He did nothing untoward, and she was party to this takedown. And I did not understand how it could be that these white people of privilege were attacking this black man who was in this historic position while the mainstream media took him down, while the NAACP and the Urban League and other black liberal leaders sat and seemed to relish this takedown.
Who were your mentor? You had this mentor at the time who we're going to get to later, who's brutally murdered. And you didn't know whether to cry for him or not, but you had this mentor, and it was along that time that you started questioning the indoctrination.
The smartest person I ever met was this guy named Mike, and I was delivering pizza in high school, and he was just different. He was alternative, and he was the smartest guy I ever knew. In hindsight, he wasn't the most ethical guy. He took the SATs for a bunch of my friends and got them 1600s. He was the smartest guy you could ever meet. And he dropped out of UC Santa Barbara. And while I was going to college, he was floundering and doing drugs. During the period of time that he was my mentor, he was taking me to alternative bookstores to read about left-wing ideas. You know, he very much was into the class struggle. And when I started to have these epiphanies, when I started to get my job, as I was aspiring to be an intellect, as I was trying to understand his worldview, as I was trying to embrace the struggle, at a certain point my dad said something that nobody told him is, you need to get a job, you need to clean up, you need to get your act together, you need to stop doing drugs. And so there was a certain point where I started to challenge my mentor. It wasn't that I felt that I was an intellect and that I was able to beat him at the game of, SAT scores. I still was about 400 points below him on that level, but I started to gain the self-confidence and the self-respect that I could call him out on his misbehavior. And I just started to move away from this guy, and I got a phone call once as I was starting to move towards independence and away from this victimology that absolutely dominated this guy's consciousness. I got a phone call that he was murdered at a hotel room in Los Angeles, and I imagine that it was during a drug deal that went bad. And to this day, I think about how I've never cried about that. But
but I was thinking about your parents, thinking about your story, the humiliation, and how you had to negotiate with the professor to give you a higher grade so you could graduate, because you realized that if you did not graduate, it would be humiliation, much more of your life would be lost. But then a friend of yours at Yale, who's very bright, called and said, Andrew Breitbart, I've got the perfect job for you.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, now that he was from Harvard. He was an astrophysics major.
Right.
Seth Jacobson was an astrophysics major who always cared for me. He always knew that in prep school that I was not going to be the A student, but that I was the class clown, but that I meant well. Even though that was how I skirted around my ADD and was able to maintain my place in an elite prep academy where everybody was Harvard, Stanford, Princeton bound. I knew that I was not going to be going to an elite academy. I didn't want to leave my friends, though. Seth knew my burden. Seth knew that
But you would visit him.
He visited me and he said, I need to take you on a walk. I said, no, just sit down. He goes, I need to take you on a walk. And he took me a walk around the street in Santa Monica, and he said, and this is when I was utterly wayward, and he said, I've seen your future. It's this thing called the internet. It works the way your brain works. And at that point, I had been diagnosed with adult ADD, and I had tried Ritalin for about a month and I hated it. I felt hideous about it.